The lower sectors of New Orion Station smelled of dust, coolant, and rusting metal. Hangar 12 sat behind old bulkhead doors and a corridor with flickering lights. When Mira and I reached the entrance, I saw the lock had been tampered with recently. Inside, rows of crates stood beneath a giant statue of Federation hero Terran Vox. Most of the containers were marked as medical equipment, but the labels were wrong. Then I heard movement. An engineer named Thomas Reed stepped out from behind the statue. He looked nervous the moment he saw us. "You're not supposed to be here," he said. "Neither are you," I answered. Behind him, hidden inside the statue's pedestal, was a military transmitter powerful enough to send data across sectors. Thomas panicked and grabbed a cutting torch, trying to destroy it. Before I could stop him, Mira pulled a small device from her coat and activated it. A pulse of static filled the hangar. The torch died. The transmitter shut down. I forced Thomas to the floor while alarms started echoing through the station. He had been sending the Draxar's patrol routes, ship movements, and security codes for months. And by then, it was already too late. Within an hour, the station had sealed every dock, cargo lane, and civilian transit corridor. Thomas Reed was gone from my custody before I could ask him a second question. Internal security took him to an interrogation block near the command level, and the first reports coming back were worse than I expected. He had not been working alone. There were 7 more compromised personnel on New Orion Station, including 2 logistics officers, a communications technician, and 1 dockmaster with access to military freight schedules. The Draxars had spent months studying us. They knew which patrol groups rotated too slowly. They knew which colonies had weak shield grids. They knew which stations stored refugee transports instead of warships. Every careless decision the Federation had made was now sitting inside an enemy database. I stood in tactical command beside Commander Ellis while the station monitors filled with alerts. Outer colonies under attack, freighters destroyed near the border, mining platforms gone dark. Then the first real fleet reports arrived. 3 Federation stations had fallen in less than 40 minutes. A Draxar strike force had entered the Hesper corridor and cut civilian evacuation routes between 6 populated systems. Entire sectors were losing contact one by one. No one in tactical command spoke very loudly after that. Mira stood beside me, silent, holding her data pad against her chest. "Their first wave is too organized," she said quietly. "They already know where everyone will retreat." Commander Ellis looked up from his console. "Then where do we send our fleet?" Mira touched the display and expanded a sector map around New Orion. "There," she said. She pointed directly at the planet below us. Ellis frowned. "New Orion? The Draxars do not care about the station," Mira said. "They care about the shipyards on the surface. The fuel reserves. The orbital relays. If they take this system, they cut Federation reinforcements in half." I looked at the map. She was right again. The attacks on the border were not the real objective. They were distractions. The Draxars wanted New Orion because everything important in this region passed through it. "They'll hit us within 12 hours, I said. Commander Ellis turned toward the command staff. "Recall every patrol group in range. Wake up reserve crews. Arm every defense platform in orbit." Around us, officers began moving faster. No speeches, no panic, just work. That was the human side of the station. When things became hopeless, we got quieter. By midnight, New Orion had become a fortress. Human destroyers moved into low orbit above the planet. Civilian transports were escorted into underground hangars on the surface. Old missile batteries that had not been used in 20 years were dragged out of storage and brought online. The Federation officers still looked nervous. The humans did not. I stood on an observation deck overlooking the planet when Mira found me there. Below us, New Orion glowed beneath clouds and city lights. Above it, hundreds of ships moved through the dark in organized lines. "You were right in the council chamber," she said. "No," I replied. "I was just earlier than everyone else." She was quiet for a moment. "My people thought humans were reckless," she said. "Most species do. We are, but you plan for disaster before anyone else believes it is real. I looked out toward the distant stars. Humans come from a world where everything tries to kill you, I said. Weather, disease, animals, other humans. If you survive long enough, you stop assuming things will work out on their own. Mira looked at me for several seconds. Then the station alarms began again. This time they were different. Not warning tones, combat tones. A voice echoed through the station. Multiple Draxar fleets entering the system. Estimated arrival, 9 minutes. Below us, New Orion continued turning slowly beneath the stars. And for the first time since Helios Prime, the Federation finally understood that the war had already begun. The first Draxar ships appeared as red marks on the tactical displays above Tactical Command. Then more followed. Carrier groups, destroyers, heavy cruisers, support lines behind them. Their fleets emerged from jump space in organized waves beyond the outer defense perimeter. Black shapes against the stars with engine flares glowing dark red across the void. No one in the room spoke for several seconds. There were too many of them. Commander Ellis stood at the center console with both hands pressed against the display table. Confirm enemy numbers. A tactical officer looked down at her screen. 83 major warships in the first wave. More incoming behind them. Defense batteries online? All platforms ready. Civilian evacuation? Still underway on the surface. Ellis nodded once. Then we hold. The first Draxar attack came 6 minutes later. Their long-range weapons struck the outer defense stations in orbit around New Orion's second moon. The tactical display showed 3 Federation platforms vanish almost instantly. No warning, no chance to retreat, just 3 bright flashes and then empty space where thousands of people had been standing seconds earlier. The room stayed quiet. I had seen humans react to bad news before. The older species panicked when they realized they were losing. Humans became calm. Commander Ellis gave orders in a steady voice. Launch interceptors. Bring destroyer groups forward. Keep the carriers behind the inner ring. Mira stood beside me, studying the tactical map. They're not trying to break through, she said. What do you mean? She touched the display with one hand. Their attack pattern is wrong. They're targeting the outer defenses, but they're leaving a gap here. She pointed toward the northern orbital corridor above the planet. At first I did not understand what she was seeing. Then I saw it. The Draxars were shaping the battle, forcing Federation ships away from one side of the system, creating a path. They're sending something through the gap, I said. Mira nodded. Probably troop carriers. Commander Ellis heard us. He looked at the display for 2 seconds and immediately understood. Move the reserve group into the northern corridor, he ordered. Now, a young officer hesitated. Sir, that leaves the southern line exposed. If the Draxars land troops on New Orion, this battle is over before it starts. The reserve fleet moved. 20 human ships broke formation and accelerated across the system. Seconds later, new contacts appeared exactly where Mira predicted. Draxar troop carriers. More than 40 of them. The first carrier entered the corridor just as the human destroyers arrived. Then the battle finally became visible from the station windows. Missiles crossed the darkness in bright white lines. Railgun rounds flashed through the void. One of the Draxar carriers split apart under concentrated fire and drifted downward toward the atmosphere below, burning as it fell. Another carrier exploded beside it. Then a third. The Draxars adjusted immediately. Their escort ships surged forward to protect the troop transports, and the fighting spread across orbit in every direction. One Federation cruiser vanished in a sphere of blue-white fire. A Draxar destroyer lost half its hull and spun out into deep space. Fragments of burning ships began falling through the atmosphere toward the planet below. I looked through the observation glass and saw streaks of fire crossing the clouds above New Orion. People were dying down there already. Mira lowered her voice. The Draxars know we stopped their landing attempt. Yes, they'll escalate now. Before I could answer, every light in Tactical Command flickered once. Then the main display changed. A new contact had entered the system. Only one ship, but it was enormous. The room fell silent as its outline appeared across the tactical screen. Draxar Command Dreadnought, nearly 12 kilometers long, heavier than anything else in the system. Commander Ellis stared at it. Then he spoke quietly. That ship is here to kill the planet. The dreadnought moved slowly across the tactical display like a continent drifting through space. Its hull was black, edged with dark red armor plating and lined with heavy weapon batteries that stretched for kilometers along its sides. Smaller Draxar ships moved around it in organized formations, staying close to its shields as if they already knew the battle had changed. Commander Ellis stared at the tactical projection. Identification? A sensor officer swallowed before answering. Draxar Flagship Harbinger of Wrath. The name alone was enough to make several Federation officers go silent. I had read about Draxar dreadnoughts before. Entire military archives had been written about them. They were not normal warships. They were mobile siege platforms built to break planets, crack orbital defenses, and force surrender through fear before the real invasion even began. The Harbinger of Wrath had destroyed 14 colonies in the last war. Now it was above New Orion. Estimated weapon range? Ellis asked. 700,000 kilometers. How long until it can fire on the planet? 20 minutes. The room stayed still for a second. 20 minutes was not enough time to evacuate another city, move another fleet, or prepare another defensive line. 20 minutes was barely enough time to decide who would die first. Mira stepped closer to the tactical table. It has weak points, she said quietly. Commander Ellis looked at her. Everything has weak points. The forward shields are too strong, she continued. The side armor is layered, but the rear thermal vents are exposed whenever it redirects power into its spinal cannon. One of the tactical officers shook his head. No ship can get that close. I looked at the map again. He was right. The dreadnought sat behind an entire wall of Draxar escorts. Cruisers, destroyers, missile boats. Anything approaching it would be torn apart long before it reached firing range. Unless it came from below. I leaned over the display. There's still debris in low orbit from the troop carriers we destroyed. Ellis looked at me immediately. You want to hide a strike group inside the wreckage. Not a strike group, I said. One ship. Mira understood before anyone else did. A destroyer, she said. Small enough to disappear inside the debris field. Fast enough to reach the vents before they know what it's doing. Commander Ellis looked around the room. Who do we have close enough? A young officer answered almost immediately. The destroyer Valkyrie is already operating near the northern corridor. I knew the ship. Old, fast, human-built. Captain Elena Ward commanded it. Ellis opened a direct channel. Ward appeared on the screen a second later. Dark hair tied back, uniform collar open. No sign of panic in her face even with half the system burning around her. Captain, Ellis said, we need you to kill a dreadnought. Ward glanced off-screen toward her bridge crew. Then she looked back. Understood. No hesitation. No questions. That was another thing older species never understood about humans. Once we accepted that something had to be done, we stopped wasting time discussing whether it was possible. The Valkyrie broke formation 3 minutes later. On the tactical display, its signal disappeared into the field of wreckage drifting between the two fleets. Broken carriers, burning hull sections, clouds of frozen metal and shattered engines. The destroyer moved through all of it without transmitting a single signal. The Harbinger of Wrath continued advancing toward the planet. 1 million civilians still remained on the surface. The dreadnought charged its main weapon. Energy readings climbed across every sensor in tactical command. A long red line formed at the center of the enemy ship where its spinal cannon sat buried beneath armored plates. Mira watched the power readings. Now, she said quietly. The Valkyrie emerged from the debris field directly beneath the dreadnought. For 1 second, no one on the Draxar ship reacted. Then every enemy weapon in range turned toward it at once. The destroyer accelerated hard. Railgun fire crossed the darkness around it. Missiles exploded behind it. One hit tore away half its engines. Another blew open its rear hull. But the Valkyrie kept moving. It reached the Harbinger's underside just as the dreadnought shifted power into its spinal cannon. And for half a second, the rear thermal vents opened. Captain Elena Ward never slowed down. The Valkyrie came out of the debris field with half its hull burning and one engine already gone, but it kept accelerating toward the Harbinger of Wrath as if damage no longer mattered. On the tactical display, the destroyer looked impossibly small beside the dreadnought. The Harbinger reacted immediately. Its escort ships broke formation and turned inward. Missile batteries opened fire. Heavy railguns lit the darkness with long white streaks that passed so close to the Valkyrie that fragments of its outer armor peeled away into space. One hit struck the destroyer's bow. Another tore through the side of the ship and vented half a deck into vacuum. Still the Valkyrie kept moving. Captain Ward's voice came through the command speakers from the live tactical feed. Target in range. Commander Ellis gripped the edge of the tactical table. Do you have a firing solution? Not yet. The dreadnought's thermal vents were beginning to open along its lower hull as more power flowed into the spinal cannon. Massive armored plates separated one by one, exposing the glowing interior beneath. That was the only vulnerable point on the entire ship, and it would only stay open for a few seconds. The Valkyrie rolled hard to avoid another missile strike. One warhead exploded so close to the ship that the tactical feed vanished in static for a moment before returning. Its engine output dropped by 30%. A warning light flashed across the display. Structural failure imminent. Mira stood beside me without moving. Come on, she whispered. The dreadnought's main weapon continued charging. On the central monitor, energy levels rose past 80%. If it fired, New Orion would lose half the northern continent in a single shot. Captain Ward's voice returned over the speakers. Target exposed. The Valkyrie fired. Its forward railguns hit first, punching through the outer vent plating. A second later, every missile the destroyer still carried launched at once. 12 warheads crossed the gap between the ships and disappeared into the open thermal vents beneath the dreadnought. For 1 second, nothing happened. Then the Harbinger of Wrath split open from the inside. The explosion was not sudden. It spread. Fire rolled through the dreadnought's lower decks in long chains of light. Entire sections of the hull burst apart as internal reactors overloaded one after another. The spinal cannon detonated inside its own firing chamber, sending a column of white energy through the center of the ship. The tactical display flashed so brightly that half the officers in the room looked away. When the light faded, the Harbinger was gone. Only burning debris remained where the largest ship in the Draxar fleet had been. Silence filled tactical command. Then every sensor station began reporting the same thing at once. The Draxar fleet was retreating. Their cruisers turned first, then the carriers, then the destroyers. Without the dreadnought, their formation collapsed into confusion. Some ships attempted to cover the withdrawal. Others simply ran. Commander Ellis looked down at the tactical map in disbelief. They're leaving, one officer said quietly. No, I replied. They're surviving. The Federation fleet pushed forward immediately. Human destroyers chased the retreating Draxar ships through the outer orbital lanes while missile batteries on the surface fired at anything still within range. Burning wreckage drifted across the system in silent clouds. Below us, New Orion was still alive. Millions of people were still alive. Mira finally let out a slow breath beside me. You knew a human ship would try it, she said. Yes, you knew they would not turn back. No, I said quietly. Humans only turn back if there's still something left to save behind them. The tactical room lights reflected against the observation windows as the last Draxar ships disappeared into jump space. For the first time since the war had started, the station became quiet. Not because the danger was gone. Because everyone finally understood that humanity was not going to run. The news of New Orion spread across the Federation faster than the Draxars themselves. For the first time since the war began, the Federation had not merely survived an attack. It had stopped one. By morning, every major government in Federation space had received battle footage from New Orion orbit. They saw the harbinger of wrath advancing through the system like a moving city. They saw the Valkyrie disappear into the debris field. They saw Captain Elena Ward's destroyer emerge beneath the dreadnought and destroy it from inside. Most importantly, they saw what happened after. Human ships did not retreat once the Draxars turned away. They pursued. The Federation fleets had always fought defensively. They protected borders, evacuated civilians, and waited for the enemy to make mistakes. Humans did something else entirely. We hunted retreating forces before they could recover. Over the next 48 hours, human strike groups followed the withdrawing Draxar fleets through 3 neighboring systems. They destroyed damaged cruisers, intercepted troop transports, and cut apart logistics convoys before they could regroup. By the end of the second day, the Draxars had lost more ships retreating from New Orion than they had during the battle itself. The Federation Council held another emergency meeting on Helios Prime. This time no one laughed when humans entered the chamber. I stood beside Commander Ellis and 3 other Terran officers while the delegates argued over what to do next. The Draxars can still be negotiated with, one representative insisted. If we offer terms now, perhaps we can end the war before more worlds burn. They already burned worlds, Ellis replied. You do not negotiate with an enemy in the middle of an invasion. You stop them first. A Brocken military advisor leaned forward. Humanity seems unusually prepared for this conflict. No, I said. Humanity is unusually prepared for conflict. That ended the room for a few seconds. The council no longer looked at humans like children. They looked at us the way prey animals watch fire. Useful, necessary, dangerous. Mira sat near the rear of the chamber beside the Lenari delegation. She had become quiet since New Orion. Not frightened, thoughtful. After the meeting ended, she found me alone near one of the observation halls overlooking Helios Prime's outer docking ring. Thousands of ships moved beyond the glass. Military transports, refugee vessels, repair barges. The Federation was finally mobilizing. You changed them, Mira said quietly. I shook my head. No, the Draxars changed them. They listen to you now. They listen because they are afraid. Mira looked out at the ships. My people believed humans were impulsive, aggressive, reckless. We are all of those things. Yes, she said, but not in the way we thought. I looked at her. She folded her hands behind her back and continued watching the stars beyond the station glass. You do not panic, she said softly. You do not wait for permission. You do not assume someone else will solve the problem. That usually gets people killed. And yet your species survives. I thought about New Orion. About Captain Ward and the Valkyrie. About the millions of people still alive because one destroyer never turned away. Humans survive because we accepted a long time ago that survival is ugly, I said. Most species spend too much time trying to look civilized while they die. Mira was silent for a moment. Then she nodded once. Far beyond Helios Prime, the Draxars were gathering for another attack. And this time, the Federation was no longer waiting helplessly behind its walls. Because humanity had finally taught them the difference between enduring a war and fighting one. 3 days after the battle for New Orion, the Federation launched its first coordinated counteroffensive. Not because the Council had suddenly become brave, because the Draxars had finally shown the galaxy what surrender looked like. Refugee transports from the outer colonies began arriving at Helios Prime in constant waves. Damaged civilian ships drifted into the docking rings with half their hulls burned away. Entire families were packed into cargo bays because there was no room left in passenger sections. Some of them had not eaten in 2 days. Some had not spoken since their worlds fell. I walked through one of the refugee processing centers with Mira beside me. Rows of injured civilians sat under emergency lights while medical teams moved between them. The air smelled like disinfectant, overheated electronics, and exhaustion. A young Brocken boy sat alone near the far wall holding a cracked helmet in both hands. What happened to him? Mira asked quietly. I looked toward the medical officer standing nearby. His parents stayed behind during the evacuation, she said. Their transport never made it off the ground. Mira said nothing after that. Neither did I by evening. The Federation fleets had begun gathering around Helios Prime. Hundreds of ships filled the space around the station in organized formations. Human carriers floated beside ancient alien cruisers. Destroyers moved between docking arms while supply ships loaded fuel, ammunition, and medical cargo. The Federation had finally realized something simple. If the Draxars kept advancing, there would be nothing left to save. Commander Ellis stood at the center of tactical command as fleet officers from 12 species argued around the display table. The Draxars are massing near the Ardent Corridor, one officer said. If they break through there, they can reach the core systems in less than a week. A Lenari admiral shook her head. We should fortify Helios Prime instead, and let them burn every colony between here and there? Ellis asked. No one answered. I looked down at the tactical display. The Ardent Corridor was narrow, a chain of systems connected by only a few stable jump routes. If the Draxars controlled it, they could move directly toward the Federation core without resistance. Mira stepped closer to the map. They will expect us to defend the station, she said quietly. Commander Ellis nodded. They always attack where people are afraid. Mira touched the display. Then we attack where they are confident. The room became quiet. She highlighted a supply system behind the Draxar front. A world called Karis Station. Fuel depots, ammunition reserves, repair docks, everything the Draxars needed to continue their advance. If we destroy this, Mira said, their fleets at Ardent slow down. They lose fuel, supplies, and reinforcements. A Brocken commander frowned. Karis is deep behind enemy lines. Yes, Mira said. That is why they will not expect us there. Commander Ellis looked at me. I already knew what he was thinking. We send a strike force, I said. Fast ships only. Human destroyers. Stealth corvettes. Hit the supply base and leave before the Draxars understand what happened. Several Federation officers looked uncomfortable immediately. Direct attacks inside enemy territory were not how they fought wars. It was exactly how humans fought them. Commander Ellis straightened. Prepare the fleet, he said. We leave in 2 hours. The officers around the table rushed to their stations. Mira stayed where she was, staring at the tactical map. You were right on Helios Prime, she said quietly. About what? The Draxars wanted weak points. I looked at the highlighted supply world beyond the front lines. So do we, I replied. We left Helios Prime under blackout conditions. No announcements, no fleet broadcasts, no formal council declaration. The strike force consisted of 18 ships, 9 human destroyers, 4 stealth corvettes, 3 Federation frigates, and 2 Lenari electronic warfare vessels. Small enough to move quickly. Strong enough to burn a supply world if we reached it before the Draxars reacted. I stood on the bridge of the destroyer Resolute beside Commander Ellis while the fleet moved through jump space toward Karis Station. Mira stood near the tactical display with her hands folded behind her back. She had spent the last 4 hours studying Draxar logistics patterns. They rotate patrols every 6 hours, she said. Their outer defense ships are ceremonial. The real security is around the fuel depots. Ellis glanced toward her. How sure are you? Certain. One of the bridge officers looked up from his station. Entering the Karis system in 30 seconds. The lights dimmed slightly as the ship prepared to drop from jump. Then the stars returned. Karis Station appeared in front of us. It was larger than I expected. A ring-shaped military dock floated above a gray mining world surrounded by fuel platforms, ammunition depots, and repair yards. Hundreds of cargo vessels moved between them in organized lanes. Draxar warships patrolled the outer perimeter in slow circles. They were not expecting an attack. Not here. Not this far behind the front. Commander Ellis looked around the bridge. Target priorities? Fuel first, I said. Then ammunition. Then shipyards. Mira touched the display. Destroy their communications towers too. If they cannot warn the front lines, the panic spreads faster. Ellis nodded once. Begin the attack. The fleet accelerated immediately. Human destroyers broke formation and moved toward the fuel depots while the stealth corvettes disappeared from sensors completely. Lanari ships flooded the local communications grid with interference. By the time the Draxars realized they were under attack, the first explosions had already begun. A fuel platform vanished in a white flash bright enough to light half the system. Then another. Then 3 more. The Draxar ships near the station turned too slowly. Their formation had been designed to stop raids from pirates or smugglers, not military strike groups moving with human speed. Our destroyers hit the outer docks first. Missiles crossed the darkness in long silver lines and slammed into the ring station. Entire sections of its outer hull collapsed inward. Cargo ships broke apart at their moorings. Burning debris drifted away into space. One of the stealth corvettes emerged directly above the communications array and destroyed it with a railgun burst. The entire Draxar command network went dark. Panic spread instantly. Enemy ships broke formation trying to decide what mattered most. Some moved to defend the station. Others rushed toward the fuel depots. A few simply turned and fled toward deep space. That was when the ammunition reserves exploded. For a second, it looked like a second sun had appeared near Karis Station. Fire rolled through the dockyards in expanding waves. The shockwave hit several Draxar cruisers and tore them apart before they could escape. Smaller ships vanished entirely. Even on the Resolute's bridge, we felt the vibration through the hull. A tactical officer looked down at her console. Enemy formations collapsing. They're retreating. Commander Ellis kept his eyes on the burning station. No, he said quietly. They're confused. The difference mattered. Retreating enemies could regroup. Confused enemies made mistakes. Mira watched the tactical map for several seconds. Then she pointed toward the far side of the system. New contacts. I looked up. More Draxar ships were arriving from jump space. Heavy cruisers. Carrier escorts. Too many. They had finally realized what was happening. Commander Ellis straightened. Recall all strike groups. We got what we came for. Outside the bridge windows, Karis Station continued burning. Fuel depots exploded one after another. Dockyards collapsed. Damaged Draxar ships drifted helplessly through the wreckage. The enemy had lost supplies, repairs, ammunition, and communications in less than 20 minutes. For the first time in the war, the Draxars knew what it felt like to be unprepared. The return from Karis Station was quiet, not because the fleet had escaped cleanly. We had lost 2 destroyers during the withdrawal and 1 Lanari ship had fallen behind after its engines were damaged by a Draxar cruiser. By the time the remaining ships reached Federation space, half the hull of the Resolute was burned black and 3 decks were still sealed from decompression. But we had destroyed Karis. The Draxars no longer had fuel depots near the front. Their ammunition reserves were gone. Their repair docks were drifting through space in broken pieces. Every surviving enemy ship in the Ardent Corridor would soon discover that supplies mattered more than pride. That lesson arrived quickly. Within 24 hours, Draxar fleet movements across the front began to slow down. Their attacks became smaller, less coordinated. Convoys stopped arriving on schedule. Several Draxar warships were forced to abandon their positions entirely because they no longer had enough fuel to stay there. The Federation saw all of it. For the first time, the Council fleets started moving forward instead of backward. I stood in tactical command on Helios Prime while fleet reports filled the displays around us. The Draxars have pulled out of the Hesper corridor. Enemy troop transports abandoning 3 occupied colonies. Federation forces entering the Ardent systems without resistance. The room felt different now. Not hopeful. Hope was still dangerous, but no one looked defeated anymore. Commander Ellis stood beside the tactical table with his arms folded. They're falling back toward the Veyra Line, he said. The Veyra Line was the final Draxar defensive barrier before their own territory began. Fortress stations, minefields, heavy fleets, everything they had left would be waiting there. Mira studied the tactical map in silence. They will make their stand there, she said quietly. Yes, I replied. And if they lose? I looked at the glowing line of enemy systems beyond the front. Then the war ends. Mira nodded once, but there was something unsettled in her face. Later that night, I found her alone in one of the observation corridors near the upper docking ring. Beyond the glass, Helios Prime was surrounded by warships and refugee transports. Thousands of lights drifted through the darkness around the station. My people are frightened of humans now, she said without looking at me. They should be frightened of the Draxars. They are frightened of both. I leaned against the observation rail beside her. You think we went too far at Karis? You destroyed an entire supply world in minutes. We destroyed military targets. You did not hesitate. I looked out toward the stars. No, I said quietly. We didn't. Mira finally turned toward me. That is what frightens them, she said. The other species hesitate. They argue. They question themselves. And humans do not? We do, I replied. Just not during the fight. She stared at me for several seconds. Then she looked back toward the ships outside. My people once believed humans were reckless because you were young, she said softly. Now I think you are reckless because you already know exactly how much damage you can survive. Neither of us spoke after that. Outside the station, Federation fleets were gathering for the final push toward the Veyra Line. And somewhere beyond the darkness, the Draxars were waiting behind their last defenses, still believing they could stop what humanity had started. The Veyra Line stretched across 6 systems and 3 fortified sectors. It was not a border in the traditional sense. It was a wall. The Draxars had spent decades building it. Orbital defense platforms ringed every inhabited world. Minefields drifted between the planets in overlapping layers. Heavy shipyards sat behind shield networks strong enough to survive sustained bombardment. Entire moons had been hollowed out and turned into military stations. Every Draxar fleet still capable of fighting had fallen back there. More than 600 warships waited behind the Veyra defenses. The Federation had never broken a defensive line like this before. That was what every council officer kept saying. I stood in the command chamber aboard the Federation flagship Resolute as the combined fleet dropped out of jump space beyond the outer minefields. Hundreds of ships filled the darkness around us. Human destroyers, Brocken cruisers, Lanari support ships, Federation carriers. Everything the galaxy still had left was here. Commander Ellis stood at the center of the bridge with both hands behind his back. Enemy formations confirmed, a sensor officer said. Defense stations active. Minefields extending across the entire corridor. A Federation admiral near the rear of the chamber folded his arms. We should stop here, he said. Bombard the defenses from range. Force them to surrender. They won't surrender, I replied. They know what happens if they lose. The admiral looked at me. And what exactly happens if they lose? No one answered that, because everyone already knew. Mira stood beside the tactical display studying the Veyra defenses. The minefields are layered, she said quietly. But they are not random. Commander Ellis looked at her. They are guiding us. She touched the display. The minefields formed narrow openings between the systems. Channels wide enough for fleets to enter, but only in predictable directions. They want us to come through the center, Mira said. That is where their heaviest guns are waiting. A Brocken commander frowned. So we attack from the flanks. No, I said. Everyone on the bridge turned toward me. I pointed toward one of the outer defense moons near the edge of the Veyra Line. If we take that station first, the minefield network collapses on one side. Then the rest of the fleet has an opening. The Brocken commander looked doubtful. That station has shields stronger than most planets. Then we do not destroy it, I replied. We board it. Silence followed that. Most Federation species hated boarding actions. They preferred distance, missiles, shields, formal fleet battles. Humans trusted close-range violence more than anything else. Commander Ellis opened a secure channel. Marine units prepare for assault operations. Around the bridge, officers moved faster. Outside, the fleet began to split into attack groups. Human destroyers moved toward the outer moon while heavier Federation ships advanced toward the center to keep the Draxars focused on the wrong target. The first shots of the battle crossed the darkness minutes later. Long-range railguns flashed between the fleets. Draxar missiles spread across space in huge waves. Federation carriers launched hundreds of strike craft into the minefield corridors while Brocken cruisers opened fire on the nearest defense stations. The Veyra Line answered with everything it had. One Federation ship vanished under concentrated fire before it could even reach the minefields. Then another. The outer moon station lit up with heavy weapons as human destroyers closed in beneath its shields. Boarding pods away, a tactical officer said. On the main display, dozens of armored pods launched from the human ships and crossed the darkness toward the moon station. The Draxars saw them immediately. Point defense guns opened fire. Several pods exploded before they reached the hull. The others kept going. I watched the tactical feed as the surviving pods slammed into the outer structure of the station and disappeared inside. Then the signal feed cut out. For a few seconds, the bridge went quiet except for the sound of weapons fire echoing through the hull. No one spoke, because everyone knew what was happening inside that station. Dark corridors, heavy weapons, close-range fighting, the kind of battle humans had been fighting against each other for thousands of years. Then the tactical display changed. The outer moon station went dark. Its shields collapsed. Its minefield control network shut down. And across the Veyra Line, a massive gap opened in the Draxar defenses. The gap in the Veyra Line lasted less than 4 minutes. That was all Commander Ellis needed. The moment the outer moon station lost power, the Federation fleet surged forward through the opening. Human destroyers led the advance, slipping through the shattered minefield corridor while heavier cruisers followed behind them. The Draxars reacted immediately. Their reserve fleets moved to close the breach, and the entire center of the Veyra Line shifted toward the outer flank. Massive cruisers turned in formation. Defense batteries rotated toward the gap. Hundreds of missiles crossed the darkness in dense waves. But they were too late. The first human ships were already inside the defensive line. I stood beside Mira at the tactical display as the battle spread across 3 systems at once. Enemy fleets repositioning. A sensor officer shouted. They're abandoning the center. Commander Ellis looked down at the map. Good, he said quietly. That is where the carriers go. The Federation carriers accelerated through the center of the Veyra Line while the Draxars were still focused on the breach. Strikecraft poured from their launch bays in huge formations, racing toward defense stations and shield generators behind the front. The Draxars had built the Veyra Line to stop fleets from getting through. They had never imagined anyone would attack the inside of it. One of the Draxar fortress stations exploded above the planet Rethar after human bombers destroyed its shield network. Another station lost power completely when Federation Marines seized its reactor core. Across the entire defensive line, Draxar formations began to break apart as their own fortifications turned into obstacles. Enemy command ships retreating toward the inner systems, another officer reported. Commander Ellis shook his head. No retreat. He touched the tactical display. Cut them off. Human destroyers and Lanari corvettes accelerated toward the inner jump routes behind the Draxar fleets. Fast ships slipped between burning stations and shattered minefields, moving to block the enemy escape corridors before they could collapse into full retreat. The Draxars realized what was happening too late. They were trapped between the Federation fleet in front of them and human strike groups behind them. For the first time in the war, the Draxars had nowhere left to go. The battle turned ugly after that. Not grand, not glorious, just ugly. Damaged ships rammed each other at close range. Boarding pods crossed between drifting wrecks. Entire squadrons vanished inside overlapping missile explosions. One Draxar cruiser fired on its own disabled escort ships to clear a path through the debris. Humans kept advancing. That was what Mira noticed first. Even after losing ships, even after seeing destroyers burn apart in front of them, human formations never stopped moving forward. Damaged ships dropped behind the line. Fresh ships moved through the gaps. There was no hesitation, no pause, just pressure, constant, relentless. They are afraid of you now, Mira said quietly. I looked at the tactical map. Across the Veyra Line, Draxar ships were abandoning their formations and running for any jump route still open. Yes, I said, they should be. Then the central Draxar command station exploded. Its reactor core overloaded after Federation Marines captured the lower control decks. Fire rolled through the entire structure before the station broke apart above the planet beneath it. The remaining Draxar fleets collapsed after that. Some surrendered. Most ran. By the end of the battle, the Veyra Line no longer existed. Only burning debris remained where the strongest Draxar defenses had once stood. And beyond the wreckage, the road into Draxar territory finally lay open. Beyond the ruined Veyra Line, Draxar territory looked nothing like the Federation had imagined. There were no endless reserve fleets waiting in the dark, no hidden armadas, no final line of invincible warships protecting the Empire's inner systems. There were factories, fuel stations, transport routes, civilian worlds. The Draxars had spent so long advancing that they had forgotten how to defend themselves. The Federation fleet crossed the border 3 days after the battle. No one celebrated. No one made speeches. The bridge of the Resolute remained quiet as the first Draxar systems appeared across the tactical display. Human ships moved at the front of the formation while Federation fleets followed behind them in organized lines. Commander Ellis stood near the center table with his hands clasped behind his back. Resistance? A sensor officer looked down at his console. Minimal. Several local patrol groups retreating deeper into Draxar space. Leave them, Ellis said. We are not here for patrol ships. Mira stood beside me, watching the tactical map slowly expand as new systems came into range. You are going after their government, she said. Yes. The Federation would have spent years negotiating border terms after Veyra. The Federation did not spend the last month watching colonies burn. Ahead of us, the Draxar home sectors began to appear one by one. Their worlds were larger than most Federation colonies. Their industrial stations were enormous. Entire moons had been turned into shipyards. It was the infrastructure of an empire that had never imagined itself losing. Human strike groups began targeting logistics centers first. Fuel depots vanished under missile strikes. Communications hubs were disabled. Orbital shipyards were left burning above their own worlds. Human fleets avoided civilian population centers whenever possible, but everything supporting the Draxar military disappeared. Within 48 hours, entire regions of Draxar space had gone dark. That was when the surrender messages began. At first they came from minor governors, then local admirals, then military commanders trapped behind destroyed supply lines. Each message sounded almost identical. Cease fire. Negotiation request. Terms of surrender. The Federation Council wanted to answer them immediately. They sent urgent transmissions to Commander Ellis asking him to halt the advance and open diplomatic channels. Ellis ignored every one of them. We keep moving, he said quietly. Mira looked at him. They are trying to surrender. No, Ellis replied. They are trying to buy time. The final Draxar government fleet made its stand above the world of Karthus Prime. It was their capital, a planet covered in black oceans, enormous cities, and enough military infrastructure to support another year of war if they were given the chance. More than 200 Draxar ships waited above the planet when we arrived. I stood beside the tactical display as the enemy formation appeared across the main screen. Commander Ellis looked at it for several seconds. Then he gave the order. Break them. The battle for Karthus Prime lasted 11 hours. The Draxars fought harder there than they had anywhere else in the war. Because they were no longer fighting for territory. They were fighting because they had finally realized what humans were willing to do if the war continued. Human destroyers attacked from below the orbital plane while Federation carriers struck from above. Lanari ships jammed enemy communications. Brocken cruisers shattered the outer defense rings around the planet. The Draxars fought desperately. It did not matter. By the end of the battle, Their capital fleet was gone. Some ships burned in orbit. Some drifted powerless through the wreckage. Others surrendered when their weapons failed and their ammunition ran out. Below us, Carthus Prime still turned slowly beneath its cloud cover and dark oceans. Its cities were untouched. Its people were alive. Commander Ellis looked down at the planet through the bridge glass. Then he opened a direct channel to the Draxar government. "This is Commander Ellis of the Terran Union," he said. "Your fleets are destroyed. Your borders are gone. Your supply networks no longer exist." He paused. "You wanted surrender terms." For the first time since the war began, the Draxars listened in silence. "You have them now." The surrender negotiations took place aboard Helios Prime 6 days after the fall of Carthus Prime. The Draxar delegation arrived without ceremony. No banners, no armored guards, no speeches about honor or resistance. They came because they had no other choice. I stood behind Commander Ellis inside the central chamber of the Federation Council while the Draxar officials entered under heavy escort. The room looked different than it had during the first emergency session weeks earlier. No one spoke over us anymore. No one laughed. The Draxar representative was an older male with dark red scales and silver markings along his jawline. He wore a plain black uniform without medals or rank insignia. He looked exhausted. "Our government accepts responsibility for the war," he said quietly. "We request a ceasefire and formal terms." Commander Ellis stood perfectly still. "You invaded Federation space. You destroyed civilian worlds. You executed prisoners and bombarded evacuation routes." The Draxar did not argue. "Yes." Ellis looked down at the table in front of him. Then he placed a document onto its surface. "These are the Terran conditions," he said. The Draxar representative picked it up with slow hands. "Immediate withdrawal from all occupied systems. Transfer of all surviving prisoners. Military disarmament across 6 border sectors. Permanent Federation monitoring stations inside Draxar territory. Dissolution of the Imperial War Council." The chamber remained silent while the Draxar read. Finally he looked back up. "You are dismantling our empire." Commander Ellis met his eyes. "You should have considered that before you started the war." No one in the room disagreed. The Draxars accepted the terms 3 hours later. By the end of the week, their fleets had withdrawn from every remaining occupied world. Federation prisoners returned home. Refugee convoys began moving back toward liberated colonies. The war was over, but nothing felt finished. I walked with Mira through one of Helios Prime's upper gardens 2 days after the surrender was signed. Artificial sunlight shone through the glass ceiling above us. Water moved slowly through narrow channels between stone paths and pale trees from a dozen different worlds. For the first time in weeks, there were no alarms, no tactical displays, no fleet reports, just silence. Mira carried a small journal in one hand. "You are leaving soon," she said. "Yes." "Back to Earth?" "For a while." She nodded. Around us, civilians moved quietly through the garden paths. Some wore military uniforms. Some carried medical wraps or fresh scars. Most looked tired. The whole galaxy looked tired. "My people talk about humans differently now," Mira said softly. "The old words are gone." "What old words?" "Young, reckless, primitive." I looked at her. "And what words do they use now?" She was quiet for several seconds. Then she looked down at the journal in her hand. "Dangerous," she said. I smiled a little. "That seems fair." "No," she replied quietly. "Not dangerous because you enjoy war." She looked up at me. "Dangerous because you survive it." For a moment neither of us spoke. Beyond the glass ceiling, warships still drifted around Helios Prime in silent formations. The Federation had survived, but it had survived because humanity had shown the galaxy something it could never unsee. Humans were strange. We planned for disasters before they arrived. We fought long after logic said we should stop. We endured pain, loss, exhaustion, and fear until they became ordinary. And when someone threatened the people we cared about, we became something even older species found difficult to understand. Not fearless, not merciless, just willing. Mira opened her journal and looked down at the final page. Later, I would learn what she wrote there. Humans are stubborn. They push themselves too far. They continue fighting when wiser species would surrender. That is what makes them terrifying to their enemies and invaluable to their friends. A month after the surrender, I returned to Earth for the first time since the war began. The oceans were still there. The cities were still full. People still argued in cafes, missed trains, and worried about things that had nothing to do with fleets or invasions. It felt strange, almost unreal. Mira came with me. She stood beside me on a cliff above the Atlantic Ocean while cold wind moved through her hair. Below us, waves crashed against black rocks. "This is your world," she said quietly. "Yes, it feels dangerous." I looked out at the water. "It is." She smiled a little at that. Far above us, hidden beyond the clouds, human warships still waited in orbit. The Federation called them protectors now. Other species called them something else. Warnings. Mira opened her journal one last time. Then she wrote a final sentence beneath everything else. "The galaxy survived the war, but it will never feel entirely safe around humans again."